Hello my beautiful friends, it's Amanda here, and today we're talking about this new Too Faced palette. This is the Born This Way Sunset Stripped palette. I originally showed this in my Sephora VIB sale haul. I did purchase this myself during the Sephora sale, and it's retail priced at $52 US. I want to give you as much info as I can about this palette, so we're going to do close-ups, I'm going to show you swatches. I'm also going to do a full comparison and breakdown with the original Born This Way palette. This is the Natural Nudes palette. I have one other neutral palette comparison to show you. I could probably do a million neutral palette comparisons as usual. I do have one other palette that I want to compare it to because that one is less expensive, more shades. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, and of course I'm going to do a tutorial as well. One thing I really specifically want to point out about this palette right up front is that it is very, very, very fragranced. It has sort of a floral, perfumey. I do not like it. I typically love the scented Too Faced palettes. I am not somebody who is sensitive to fragrance, and this is too strong for me. This is way too much fragrance for me. It smells like a perfume bottle. It's just, whew, it's a lot. So if you are somebody who is sensitive to fragrance in your makeup, be aware this palette is probably not for you. I have not noticed that from my other Born This Way palette, the Natural Nudes. This one's very strong. Let's take a close-up look at this Sunset Stripped palette. First off, the outer packaging here, we have this little street sign motif, some palm trees in the background, very California neutrals. This seems to be pretty on the nose for what Too Faced has been doing recently. When we look on the back here, you can see this palette is made in Italy. Just thought that was an interesting little thing to point out to you. When we look inside, we have the exact same layout, same shape and size, same little mirror and everything that the Natural Nudes palette had, with these two different size pans, larger pans for the mattes and those rectangles, and then smaller squares for the shimmers. I know this uneven size pan layout probably will be a little disturbing to some people, but I actually like this, and I think it makes logical sense based on how a lot of folks use their shadows. Now we're going to look at the swatches. You can see here finger swatches on top, brush swatches below. Pretty consistent performance opacity wise between these two application methods, but take note that the brush swatches are often a lot smoother, and I don't use any primer for these, so these just really work well with synthetic hair brushes, which is what I tend to use. Now we're taking a close-up look here. That way you can really see what these look like on the skin. Again, very consistent. For me, this palette has better mattes than shimmers, which wasn't necessarily the case with the Natural Nudes palette. Now we are seeing a variety of shimmer finishes here. Some are more of a sparkly wash of color topper type of shimmer, whereas others are definitely more opaque metallic shimmers. But overall, I think that the mattes have a more consistent and better performance for me. Next, I want to take you through two different palette comparisons. First with this Natural Nudes palette, and then I also want to show you a quick comparison with the ColourPop Bare Necessities palette. That's one of my favorite all-encompassing neutral palettes, so let's take a look at those comparisons now. A couple of key differences here that have shown up for me that I really want to make sure I point out in this review. First and foremost, the number one thing that jumps out at me is the layout of the colors. Natural Nudes decidedly goes light to medium to deep, and there's that one shade in the top corner there, that little duochrome above the deepest shade in Sunset Stripped, that just really throws my eye off. It's really out of place. Now I like that shadow, but I just feel like it's in the wrong spot. Now looking at the colors, I think you can tell Sunset Stripped is definitely decidedly orangey, warm tones, whereas the Natural Nudes has some warm tones, some really true neutral shades, some rosy tones. So I think that you're getting more of a variety of undertone in Natural Nudes, whereas Sunset Stripped, you're definitely getting a very suntan, toasty, neutral type of color. And the last thing I want to point out here is that the shimmers in Natural Nudes are consistently intense metallic shimmers, whereas we do have a little bit more of a variety as far as those different wash of color sparkles in the Sunset Stripped. So those are the key differences for me. Now, I really wanted to compare this to the Bare Necessities palette, which has been a hero as far as neutral palette comparisons. You can see here, you can really get a lot of the same looks. Bare Necessities not only is not scented, it also has a much wider variety of shades because it is a mega palette and it's less expensive. So take that for what you will, but if you already have Bare Necessities, you probably do not need to splurge over $50 on this Sunset Stripped palette because you can get some pretty darn similar looks. I'm not saying they're exact dupes, but for me, from a review standpoint, close enough. Lastly, I want to take you through a tutorial using the Sunset Stripped palette to get this eye look that I'm wearing today. And as we go through that tutorial, instead of narrating the steps, because it is a pretty basic neutral eye look, I'm just going to wrap up all my thoughts about this palette along the way. That way you can see the performance of the shadows and hear my thoughts at the same time. All in all, I don't have any major glaring issues with the Sunset Stripped palette. It performs just fine for me. It's definitely delivering what I expected it to, which was a warm neutral palette. But when it is inevitably compared to Natural Nudes or Bare Necessities or probably dozens of other neutral palettes, it's not really bringing anything to the table that makes it a standout for me. Honestly, I just see it as a slightly less favorable version of these other palettes that I compared it to, partially because it's not offering as much of a variety of undertones, partially because it's just over fragranced. And I mean, compared to Bare Necessities, it's definitely a little overpriced. And I don't think that it's a bad palette. If you look at this palette and you think that's exactly what you've been looking for, and you're especially the type of person that gets a palette like this and uses it up until it's gone and then replaces it with another neutral palette, then perhaps this is the perfect thing for you. By all means, I'm not discouraging its use because I do think that especially these mattes blended really nicely together. I felt like I had an easy time picking colors and blending them, and I didn't have to work too hard. I didn't have to think too hard. It all flowed nicely. My look ended up beautifully, and I actually wore this out on a date night and wore this for hours and hours, and it looked great. It really held up well, so performance-wise, no complaints. I just can't really see myself recommending this palette over many of the other neutrals that I already know and love. The couple things that I do like that this brings to the table that Natural Nudes doesn't is, first of all, that deepest shade is darker than the deepest shade in Natural Nudes. So if you felt like that palette was a little too light leaning for you, then perhaps this could make up the difference. And there are a couple of shifty, almost duochromes, maybe kind of duochrome shades here that I think are really interesting, and they bring something dynamic to a quote-unquote just a neutral palette. So I like those aspects. I think if they had just tweaked a couple things, first of all, less fragrance, and maybe added in one or two curveballs as far as a more mustardy shade or maybe like a macaroni and cheese type of orange, just really go for it instead of some very similar peachy tan type of colors, maybe that could have shaken it up enough to be really, really exciting for me. But overall, this ended up being good, but just okay at the end of the day. Now's the time when I want to hear what you think about this palette. Are you interested? Do you have any of the comparison palettes? I always love to hear what you think about things too, so make sure you leave all your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye! Oy, oy, oy. Wow, that palette is so fragrant. I don't remember the other one being that way. Now this one is older, so maybe it's just lost its scent over time, but this one is like, I could smell my swatches, which is not usually the case, and I'm not very sensitive to fragrance. I've been trying so hard to do like colorful, different looks for so long that it feels kind of weird to be wearing just a regular neutral eye look. Those look kind of cute with these earrings though, doesn't it? Sunset Stripped palette. Casually and sweaty cheeks are really on point today. If you don't hype yourself up, who else is gonna do it? Oh, me, I will. You look awesome. So cool, so cute, so gorgeous. We know how reviews work, Amanda. I have to leave like now, so let's keep it moving, lady. I hope you have an amazing, magical, wonderful day, and I just love your face. That's all. I'll see you soon. Okay, bye-bye now. Bye.